The African waitress wasn't afraid during a robbery. Korean Mafia boss recognized her. Chapter 1. The Language of Violence. The bullet missed Amara's head by 3 inches. She didn't flinch. While Seoul's elite dining room erupted into screams, politicians diving under tables, socialites trampling each other toward the kitchen, a K-pop idol's bodyguard pulling his client into a chokehold of protection, Amara Okonkwo stood perfectly still, water pitcher balanced in her left hand, her right hand moving in a sequence of gestures so subtle they might have been nervous fidgeting. Except they weren't. Her fingers traced the old signals: 4 hostiles. Armed. Entry team. Amateur hour. Across the chaos, through the forest of appended chairs and abandoned Louis Vuitton bags, Kim Tae-jin sat motionless in his booth. Watching. His 6 guards had drawn weapons with the synchronized precision of a military drill team, but Tae-jin himself hadn't moved. His eyes were locked on Amara's hands. He was reading her signs. And he was smiling. Everybody down. The lead robber's Korean was accented, Russian maybe, his gun a Glock 19, Amara noted clinically, sweeping the room with the jerky movements of someone high on adrenaline or something stronger. Wallets. Phones. Jewelry. Nobody moves, nobody dies. It was textbook amateur intimidation. The kind of robbery her father would have laughed at over breakfast. The kind that ended with either dead robbers or dead hostages, because fear made people stupid and stupid made them dangerous. Amara set down her water pitcher with deliberate care. The sound of glass meeting would cut through the screaming like a gunshot. Several people whimpered. The lead robber's head snapped toward her, his Glock following the movement. "You, black girl." I said down. She met his eyes through the ski mask. Measured him. 25, maybe 28. Pupils dilated. Hands shaking just enough to make him lethal by accident. The 3 men behind him were watching their leader, not the room. Rookie mistake number 2, after choosing to rob a restaurant where half the clientele probably had higher body counts than their age. "I'm going down," Amara said in Korean, her accent deliberately thick, playing up the foreigner card. Harmless. Confused. Scared. "Please, I'm going." Her hands moved again. Northwest corner. Blind spot. Kitchen access. Tae-jin's left eyebrow rose a fraction of an inch. One of his guards, the one who'd reached for his gun earlier, the one Amara had tagged as primary threat, shifted his weight almost imperceptibly. He'd caught the signal too. Of course he had. Tae-jin didn't employ men who couldn't read tactical hand signs any more than her father had employed mercenaries who couldn't field strip a rifle blindfolded. The lead robber was shouting something about a safe, about the owner, his voice pitching higher as the initial adrenaline high gave way to the crushing realization that he'd bitten off more than he could chew. One of his companions, shorter, stockier, with a Czech CZ-75 that had seen better days, was working his way through the tables, collecting phones and wallets in a designer handbag he'd grabbed from a fleeing customer. The absurdity of it almost made Amara laugh. Armed robbery with a Prada bag as your collection sack. Her father would have had a field day with this. 18 hours earlier, Myeongdong Pearl had looked different under daylight, less menacing, more mundane. Amara had arrived for her shift at 4 p.m., slipping through the service entrance where the kitchen staff smoked contraband Chinese cigarettes and gossiped about which celebrity had been seen stumbling drunk out of the private dining rooms. The other servers barely acknowledged her existence beyond the necessary coordination of table assignments and order rotation. She preferred it that way. Invisibility was a superpower when you were born into a world where visibility meant vulnerability. Her father had taught her that before she'd learned multiplication tables. The most dangerous weapon, Colonel Okonkwo had told her during one of their training sessions in the compound outside Lagos, isn't the gun in your hand. It's being so unremarkable that your enemy forgets you're armed. She'd been 9 years old, learning to palm a knife while serving tea to arms dealers who discussed cluster munitions like other men discussed football scores. The lesson had stuck. Korea had seemed like the logical choice for disappearance. Far enough from West Africa to be off the radar of her father's associates and enemies, a list that had considerable overlap. Different enough culturally that she'd stand out visually but blend in practically. Seoul's foreigner population was large enough to provide cover, small enough that she wouldn't trigger the kind of scrutiny that cities like London or New York would bring. She'd found work at Myeongdong Pearl through a combination of luck and carefully forged references. The owner, a former businessman with suspected ties to the Sangminpa gang, had been skeptical at first. But Amara spoke 5 languages, moved with the grace of someone trained in formal service, and most importantly, had the kind of face that knew when to see nothing. That last quality was invaluable in a restaurant where the real business happened in the spaces between courses. Her shift had started normally enough. Table assignments. Mais sans plus check. The usual kitchen chaos of shouted orders and clattering cookware. She'd worked the early dinner rush, tourists mostly, with a few business dinners that were actually just business dinners, nothing more sinister than expense account padding and corporate gossip. Section 3 had been blocked off, as it was every Tuesday. Reserved for special guests. The kind who tipped in cash, never complained, and whose conversations were conducted in voices too low for eavesdropping. Amara had been assigned to Section 3 exactly 3 times in her 8 months at the Pearl. Each time, she'd served men who radiated the particular brand of quiet menace that came from knowing they were untouchable. Men who looked at her dark skin with curiosity or contempt, but never suspicion, because who would suspect a foreign waitress of being anything other than exactly what she appeared to be? Tonight was supposed to be her 4th time. She'd watched Kim Tae-jin enter at 8:47 p.m. She'd checked the clock reflexively, old training making her note entry times, exit routes, potential threats, flanked by his security detail. 6 men in suits that cost more than her monthly rent, moving with the economical grace of professional killers who'd learned to disguise themselves as corporate security. But it was Tae-jin himself who'd frozen her mid-step. Those hands. She'd been 12 years old when her father had come back from the Liberia job, 2 weeks overdue and carrying wounds that should have killed him. He'd brought back something else too, a story about a Korean intelligence officer he'd pulled out of a rebel ambush, a ghost operative who'd been left behind when his mission went sideways. "Remember this, Amara," her father had said, his voice rough with pain and whatever battlefield antibiotics he'd mainlined to keep the infection at bay. "Deaths matter. In this business, your word is the only currency that holds value when everything else goes to hell. That man owes me his life. Someday, that might matter." She'd remembered the hands because her father had shown her photos, intelligence files he'd collected as insurance, as leverage, as information that might someday be traded or sold or used. Kim Tae-jin's hands holding a rifle. Kim Tae-jin's hands zip-tying captured rebels. Kim Tae-jin's hands pressed against her father's chest wound, keeping pressure while Colonel Okonkwo radioed for extraction. Those same hands now wore a watch worth more than some people made in a lifetime. When Tae-jin had looked at her across the dining room, she'd seen recognition flicker behind his eyes. Not immediate, she'd changed too much, grown from a child into a woman, gained the hard edges that came from losing everything, but recognition nonetheless. He'd known her father. And now he knew her. The question was whether that knowledge would be her salvation or her death sentence. She'd approached his table with her server's smile firmly in place, ready to pretend, ready to deflect, ready to run if necessary. And then the doors had exploded open and 4 idiots with guns had made the decision for her. The lead robber was working himself into a panic spiral, his demands getting louder and less coherent. Bad sign. Panicked criminals did unpredictable things. They shot hostages to prove they were serious. They made examples. Amara had seen it before, in Lagos, in Monrovia, in half a dozen cities where her father's business had taken them. Violence had a rhythm, a pattern. You could feel it building like a thunderstorm, that electric tension before everything went sideways. She signaled again, more urgently this time, escalation imminent. Recommend neutralization. Tae-jin's response came in the form of a slight nod, barely perceptible. Then his hand moved his tie, adjusting it in a gesture that looked casual, meaningless. It wasn't. His guards shifted positions, a coordinated movement disguised as nervous shuffling. They were setting up a crossfire pattern, Amara realized. Establishing kill zones. waiting for Taejin's signal. Where's the owner? The lead robber was screaming now, his Glock pointed at a terrified middle-aged woman who'd been having dinner with her husband. Where's the safe? Tell me or I start shooting. The woman was sobbing, makeup running down her face, words tripping over each other in her panic. Her husband was trying to shield her, hands raised in supplication, offering his Rolex, his wallet, anything. Amara calculated angles, distances, variables. The robber's finger was on the trigger, tension increasing. 3 pounds of pressure. Maybe 4. The Glock's trigger pull was roughly 5.5 pounds standard. He was halfway there, adrenaline and fear doing the rest. In approximately 2.3 seconds, he was going to shoot someone. She moved. Not toward him, that would have been obvious, would have triggered his already hypersensitive threat response. Instead, she stepped backward, stumbling deliberately, knocking over the water pitcher she'd set down. Glass shattered. Water spread across the hardwood in a dramatic splash. Every eye in the room turned toward the sound, including the robbers. Taejin's guards moved like synchronized machinery. 3 shots, suppressed, so quiet they were almost polite. The kind of sound you might mistake for a cough, a door closing, something innocuous. The 3 backup robbers dropped before they understood they'd been shot. The lead robber spun, his Glock tracking wildly, fingers squeezing. And Amara was there, inside his reach, her hand on his wrist, redirecting his aim toward the ceiling with a movement so smooth it looked choreographed. Her other hand drove into his solar plexus with precisely calibrated force, enough to double him over, not enough to cause permanent damage. The Glock clattered to the floor. Amara kicked it away, her heel finding the weapon with practiced accuracy, sending it skittering under a table. The robber collapsed, gasping, hands clutching his stomach. The entire sequence had taken 4 seconds. The restaurant was silent except for muffled sobbing and the lead robber's wheezing breaths. Amara stood over him, her server's apron askew, her hands steady, her breathing barely elevated. She looked up. Kim Taejin was watching her with an expression that might have been amusement or might have been something more calculating. His guards had their weapons drawn but lowered, no longer needed. Well, Taejin said in English, his voice carrying across the silent dining room. That was interesting. He stood, smoothing his suit jacket with casual elegance, and walked toward her. His footsteps were the only sound in the frozen tableau. He stopped 3 feet away, close enough to be intimate, far enough to be respectful. The girl with the steady hands, he repeated, his earlier words taking on new meaning. Your father taught you very well indeed. Amara said nothing. Her mind was racing through possibilities, outcomes, escape routes. The front door was compromised. Police would be arriving soon, drawn by some silent alarm or panicked phone call. The kitchen had 3 exits, but Taejin's men could cut her off before she made it halfway. She was trapped in a room full of witnesses who'd just watched her disarm a robber with the efficiency of a trained operative. So much for invisibility. Don't run, Taejin said quietly, reading her body language like an open book. We need to talk. About your father. About what he did for me. About what I owe his daughter. You don't owe me anything, Amara replied, her voice flat. I owe you everything. Taejin's smile was sharp as a knife. Your father saved my life. In my world, that debt doesn't die with him. It transfers. I don't want. What you want, Taejin interrupted gently, is irrelevant. What you need is protection. Because in approximately 3 minutes, the police will arrive. They'll have questions. Questions about how a waitress moved like a trained soldier. Questions about your visa status, your background, your father's business associates. He paused, letting the implications sink in. Questions, he continued, that will end with you in a detention center, followed by deportation, followed by a very short and unpleasant reunion with everyone in West Africa who'd love to know that Colonel Okonkwo's daughter is alive and vulnerable. Amara's jaw tightened. He was right. Damn him, but he was right. So here's what's going to happen, Taejin said, his tone shifting to something more businesslike. My men will handle the police. You disappeared before they arrived, went home early, weren't scheduled tonight, paperwork error. The owner will confirm it. The other servers will confirm it. These robbers, he gestured to the bodies being quietly dragged toward a service exit by his guards, will be found in an alley 3 districts away. Nothing to do with the pearl. Just another attempted robbery gone wrong. And in exchange? Amara asked, because there was always an exchange. Debts were never paid freely. In exchange, Taejin said, his dark eyes holding hers, you come with me. Now. Tonight. We discuss the debt I owe your father, and how exactly I intend to repay it. That sounds like a polite way of saying you're kidnapping me. Kidnapping implies you have a choice. His smile widened. You don't. But to be clear, I'm not your enemy, Amara Okonkwo. I'm the only friend you have left in this city. And friendship, in our world, is the rarest currency of all. Sirens wailed in the distance, getting closer. Taejin extended his hand. Coming, he asked. Amara looked at his outstretched palm, those hands that had held pressure on her father's wounds, that had survived hell in a Liberian jungle, that now commanded an empire built on blood and honor. She thought about her father's last words, never trust anyone who claims to be his friend. But he'd also said, debts are paid in blood or betrayal. Nothing in between. She took Taejin's hand. His grip was warm, firm, and absolutely unbreakable. Smart girl, he murmured, already moving toward a back exit his guards had secured. Your father would be proud. Or horrified, Amara thought as she followed him into the Seoul night, leaving behind her carefully constructed invisibility, her safe anonymity, her pretend life as an ordinary girl. The sirens were deafening now, but all she could hear was her father's voice, echoing from beyond the grave. In our world, debts are paid in blood or betrayal. She just hoped Taejin chose blood. Because betrayal, she knew from experience, hurt so much worse. Chapter 2. The Architecture of Debt. The black Mercedes SUV smelled like leather, expensive cologne, and the particular metallic tang that came from recently cleaned firearms. Amara sat in the back seat, flanked by 2 of Taejin's guards who'd introduced themselves with silent nods and positions that suggested they were less bodyguards and more prison wardens. Taejin sat up front, speaking rapid Korean into his phone, his tone suggesting he was rearranging someone's entire evening with the casual authority of a man who expected immediate compliance. Seoul's neon-soaked streets blurred past the tinted windows, a kaleidoscope of Hangul signs advertising everything from karaoke rooms to plastic surgery clinics, crowds of beautiful young people who had no idea that just blocks away, a robbery had been quietly erased from official record. Amara cataloged escape routes anyway. Old habits. Left window, reinforced glass, probably bulletproof. Door locks, electronic, controlled from the front. Guards, armed, alert, positioned to intercept any sudden movement. Success probability, 12%, and that was being generous. She settled deeper into the leather seat and waited. Patience was a weapon too. They drove for 23 minutes. Amara counted without meaning to, her internal clock as reliable as any GPS, through neighborhoods that got progressively more expensive. Gangnam's glittering excess gave way to quieter streets lined with walls that hid estates from curious eyes. Old money. The kind that didn't need to advertise itself. The Mercedes turned into a private driveway guarded by a gate that looked decorative, but probably cost more than most people's homes. Beyond it, a modernist mansion sprawled across manicured grounds, all clean lines, floor-to-ceiling windows, and the kind of architectural minimalism that screamed wealth so loudly it didn't need to make a sound. Welcome to my home, Taejin said as the SUV glided to a stop beneath a porte-cochere. He finally turned to look at her, his expression unreadable. Consider yourself my guest. Honored. Protected. But make no mistake, you're not free to leave until we've settled accounts. That still sounds like kidnapping, Amara observed mildly. It sounds like saving your life. Taejin opened his door, graceful despite his size. The distinction matters, even if the outcome appears similar. Inside, the mansion was a study in controlled opulence. Amara had grown up in her father's compound, a fortress disguised as a home, where every corner held weapons caches and every beautiful object doubled as a place to hide contraband. This was different. This was what happened when a man who'd lived in shadows long enough could finally afford to live in light. Modern art on the walls, actual pieces, not reproductions. Furniture that looked uncomfortable but probably cost more than cars. Everything positioned with the precision of someone who understood that aesthetics were another form of armor. Taejin led her through a hallway lined with windows overlooking a garden that was invisible in the darkness, lit only by carefully placed spotlights that turned manicured trees into theatrical sculptures. His guards had disappeared somewhere, securing the perimeter, Amara assumed, or reporting to whoever tracked the comings and goings in this gilded cage. They ended up in what Taejin called his study, though it looked more like a war room decorated by an interior designer with excellent taste and an unlimited budget. One wall was dominated by screens, currently dark, that probably displayed security feeds, news, market data. Another held bookshelves filled with volumes in Korean, English, Chinese, and what looked like Russian. A third was bare except for a single painting, a traditional Korean landscape, mountains and mist, the kind of thing that belonged in a museum. The fourth wall was all windows. Souls spread below them like a living circuit board, lights stretching to the horizon, the Han River a dark serpent cutting through the illuminated sprawl. "Drink?" Taejin asked, moving to a bar cart that held crystal decanters filled with amber liquid. "I'm working," Amara replied automatically, then caught herself. Was working. Indeed. Taejin poured 2 glasses anyway, whiskey, from the color, probably Japanese judging by the label she couldn't quite read from this distance. "You're unemployed now. The Pearl will receive your resignation tomorrow, along with 2 months severance pay. Generous, but not suspicious. You've thought of everything." "I've survived by thinking of everything." He handed her a glass, their fingers not quite touching. "To your father." A man who understood that honor is the only currency that retains value when everything else collapses. Amara didn't drink. "My father would tell you that honor is a luxury people invent to justify their violence. Your father was a pragmatist. So am I." Taejin took a measured sip, his eyes never leaving hers. "But even pragmatists understand the value of paying debts. Sit. We have much to discuss." She remained standing. Small rebellion, but rebellion nonetheless. Taejin's mouth quirked in what might have been amusement. "You're very much his daughter." He was stubborn too. Maddeningly so. "It nearly got us both killed in Liberia." "Tell me about it," Amara said, surprising herself. She'd never asked her father for details about that job. She'd learned early not to ask questions about the scars he carried, physical or otherwise. But Taejin had been there. He knew. "You want the story?" Taejin settled into a leather chair that probably cost more than she'd made in her entire time at the Pearl. "Very well. Consider it part of your education." He steepled his fingers, those hands again, elegant and deadly, and his expression shifted into something distant, remembering. 20 years ago, I was an intelligence officer for the National Intelligence Service. Officially, I gathered economic data in West Africa. Unofficially, I facilitated weapons transfers to groups that served Korean interests. We armed rebels who opposed Chinese influence, destabilized regimes that threatened our resource access, played the great game at a level most people never knew existed. "Sounds noble," Amara said drily. "It was necessary. Nations don't survive on morality, they survive on strategy." Taejin's tone suggested he'd had this argument before and won. The operation in Liberia was supposed to be simple. I was meeting with a warlord who controlled diamond mines. We provided weapons. He provided access to resources that kept our economy flowing. Everyone profited. What went wrong? Everything. The word came out flat, emotionless. The warlord was playing 3 sides against each other. Chinese intelligence had infiltrated his organization. When I arrived for the meeting, it was an ambush. My team was killed in the first 30 seconds, efficient, professional, the kind of execution that leaves no survivors. He paused, took another sip of whiskey. I should have died there. I was prepared to die there. I'd already accepted it, the way you accept the inevitable, you understand? But then your father appeared out of the jungle like he'd been conjured from air itself. 6 men with him, all specialists, all absolutely lethal. They cut through the ambush like it was nothing. Amara could picture it, her father moving through chaos with the calm of someone who'd seen it all before, who understood that violence was just another problem to be solved with the right application of force and tactics. He didn't have to save me, Taejin continued. My death would have been convenient for him, one less intelligence officer nosing around his business, one less person who knew about the weapons networks he operated. But he pulled me out anyway, kept me alive through 3 days of running, fighting, bleeding. When I asked him why, do you know what he said? Something cynical, probably. Taejin's laugh was sharp as broken glass. He said, dead men can't pay debts, and I might need a favor from Korean intelligence someday. Pure pragmatism. No pretense of heroism or morality. Just a calculated investment in future leverage. That sounds like him. It was brilliant. Taejin set down his glass with deliberate precision. Because 20 years later, I'm sitting here with his daughter, and I find myself in the rare position of owing a debt I can actually repay. Your father called in a few favors over the years, nothing major, information mostly, occasionally a blind eye to shipments moving through Korean ports. But he never asked for the big repayment. Never called in the life debt. Maybe he didn't need it. Or maybe he was saving it. Taejin leaned forward, intensity radiating from him like heat. Men like your father, like me, we understand that the most valuable debts are the ones you hold, not the ones you collect. Power deferred is power multiplied. And now that debt has transferred to you. Amara finally sat, perching on the edge of a chair that was as uncomfortable as it looked expensive. I don't want your protection. I don't want to be part of this world. I came to Korea to escape it. And how's that working for you? The question wasn't cruel, just honest. You've spent 8 months serving gangsters and politicians, pretending to be invisible while your training screams at you every time someone reaches for their coat. You disarmed a robber tonight with techniques that take years to master. You signaled tactical positions using hand signs that maybe a dozen people in this country would recognize. You think you've escaped. He shook his head slowly. You've just been holding your breath, Amara. Waiting. Because girls like you, raised like you were, trained like you were, we don't retire. We don't become ordinary. We either die or we embrace what we are. And what am I? The question came out harder than she'd intended. Dangerous. Taejin said it like a compliment. Valuable. And currently very vulnerable, because everyone in that restaurant tonight saw what you can do. The owner has connections to the Sangminpa. They'll ask questions. Other organizations will hear rumors. And someone, eventually, will connect the African waitress with unusual skills to Colonel Okonkwo's missing daughter. He was right. She knew he was right. The moment she'd moved against that robber, she'd torn away her invisibility like tissue paper. So, what do you want? Amara asked, exhaustion creeping into her voice. What's your angle? Because nobody offers protection without expecting something in return. Smart question. Taejin stood, moving to the windows, his reflection ghostly against Seoul's lights. I want to repay my debt to your father by keeping you alive. But I'm also a pragmatist. Your skills are wasted serving cocktails to men who wouldn't recognize talent if it shot them in the face, which you're clearly capable of doing. I'm not a killer. No. But you're a survivor with training most special forces operators would envy. You speak 5 languages, you understand how criminal networks operate, and most importantly, you have your father's gift for reading people. He turned back to face her. I can use someone like you. Not as muscle, I have plenty of that. As something more valuable. An advisor. An asset who can move through spaces I can't, see things my men would miss, operate in the gray areas where my reputation would be a hindrance. You want me to spy for you. I want you to survive. Working for me is how that happens. His tone softened fractionally. I'm not your enemy, Amara. I'm offering you something rare in our world, a choice. Work with me, use your skills for something more than hiding, and I'll provide resources, protection, and the kind of cover that will make you untouchable. Or refuse, and I'll arrange safe passage to whatever country you choose, with enough money to start over. Again. That's generous. That's the debt. Taejin moved closer, stopping just inside her personal space. Your father gave me my life when he had no reason to. I'm offering you yours when you need it most. The difference is, I'm hoping you're smart enough to take the better option. Amara studied him, this man who'd crawled out of hell with her father's help, who'd built an empire from shadows and blood, who was offering her something that might be salvation or might be a different kind of prison. If I say yes, she said slowly, what exactly would I be doing? Taejin's smile was sharp and satisfied. Helping me solve problems. The kind that require finesse, not force. I have an issue developing a rival organization encroaching on my territory, using methods I don't recognize. They're smart, careful, and they've avoided every trap I've set. I need fresh eyes. Someone who thinks differently than my usual people. And if I say no, then I arrange your exit and we part as friends. He extended his hand again, the same gesture from the restaurant, the same implicit offer of alliance. But I think you'll say yes. Because you're your father's daughter and he didn't raise a fool. Amara looked at his hand, those hands that had survived, that had built, that had killed and protected in equal measure. She thought about her father's voice. Debts are paid in blood or betrayal. She thought about 8 months of suffocating invisibility, of serving people who thought she was less than human, of pretending to be ordinary when every cell in her body screamed otherwise. She thought about the relief she'd felt when those robbers had crashed through the doors, the terrible, honest relief of finally speaking a language she understood. Maybe Taejin was right. Maybe she'd never escaped at all. Maybe she'd just been holding her breath. Time to breathe. She took his hand. 3 months, she said firmly. Trial period. I help you with this problem and then we reassess. I'm not signing my life away. 3 months, Taejin agreed. After which, I suspect you'll choose to stay. Don't bet on it. I always bet on survivors, Amara. We recognize our own. He released her hand and moved to his desk, producing a folder that had been waiting, prepared, she realized, because he'd known she would say yes. Inside were documents, a new identity, complete with Korean resident alien card, bank account information, an address in a building she suspected was owned by one of Taejin's shell companies. Your new life, he said simply. Amara Park, adopted daughter of a Korean businessman who died last year, recently returned from studying abroad. It'll hold up to moderate scrutiny. Anything deeper, my people will handle. She flipped through the documents, each one a small miracle of forgery and documentation. You had this ready. I've been watching you for 3 weeks, since I first spotted you at the Pearl. Taejin's admission was casual, but it sent chills down her spine. I recognized you immediately, you have your father's eyes. I've been waiting for the right moment to approach. Tonight's robbery was fortunate timing. Fortunate. Amara's laugh was bitter. Was it really a robbery? Or was it a test? Taejin's expression didn't change. Does it matter? You passed. She wanted to be angry. Should have been furious. But under the anger was something else. Recognition. Because this was exactly the kind of chess move her father would have made, creating a crisis to observe how someone responded under pressure. Like father, like debt collector. You're an asshole, she informed him. I'm a survivor, he corrected. Just like you. Now, let me show you to your room. Tomorrow, we begin. You have much to learn about how I operate, and I suspect I have much to learn about what Colonel Okonkwo taught his daughter. He led her through the mansion to a guest suite that was larger than her entire apartment had been. Bedroom, sitting room, bathroom that looked like something from a luxury hotel. Clothes in the closet, her size, her style, as if he'd cataloged her entire wardrobe. Of course he had. Rest, Taejin said from the doorway. Tomorrow, I introduce you to my organization. They'll be surprised by your presence. Some will resist. Handle them however you see fit, within reason. Define within reason. No permanent damage. Beyond that, establish yourself however necessary. They need to understand you're not decoration. You're an asset. And if they don't believe it? Taejin's smile was cold as winter. Then educate them. Your father did that very well. I imagine you inherited the skill. He left, closing the door with a soft click that somehow sounded like a cell door locking. Amara stood in the middle of the room, surrounded by luxury and surveillance and the architecture of a new prison that looked nothing like the old one but felt disturbingly familiar. She moved to the window, Not locked, she noticed, though she suspected the grounds were monitored by enough security to make escape pointless, and looked out at Seoul's endless lights. Somewhere in that sprawl was the life she'd been building. Small. Invisible. Safe. Dead. She'd killed it tonight when she'd moved against that robber. Killed it as surely as if she'd put a bullet in its head. And standing here now, in this beautiful cage owned by a man who'd survived hell with her father, she felt something she hadn't felt in 8 months. Alive. Dangerously, terrifyingly, completely alive. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. In our world, debts are paid in blood or betrayal. But there was a third option he'd never mentioned, one she was only now beginning to understand. Debts could be paid in transformation. She was Amara Okonkwo, daughter of the late great Colonel James Okonkwo, and she was done pretending to be anything else. Let Seoul's underworld learn what that meant. Chapter 3. The Education of Wolves. The morning arrived with Seoul's particular brand of aggressive sunshine, the kind that made the city's steel and glass surfaces gleam like weapons. Amara awoke to the unfamiliar luxury of silk sheets and the familiar weight of instincts that had catalogued every sound during her sleep. 3 guards rotating shifts outside her door. Taejin leaving at 5:47 a.m., his footsteps distinctive even through walls. The mansion's infrastructure humming with the quiet efficiency of serious money. Someone had left clothes on a chair by the door, designer labels in blacks and grays, the kind of anonymous expensive that would let her blend in while signaling she wasn't prey. There was also a phone, new, with a single contact labeled simply Kim. She dressed, noting the way the clothes fit perfectly. More evidence of Taejin's thorough surveillance. The thought should have angered her, but mostly she felt a grim appreciation for his attention to detail. Amateur captors locked doors. Professionals gave you the illusion of freedom while making escape irrelevant. Her father would have approved. Breakfast was served in a dining room that could have seated 20, but held only 2 places set, one at the head of the table where Taejin sat reading a tablet, the other to his right. The message was clear: honored position, subordinate role. Good morning, Taejin said without looking up. There's coffee, Brazilian, dark roast. And food, if you eat breakfast. Many soldiers don't. I'm not a soldier. Amara poured coffee anyway. It smelled obscenely good. No, you're something more interesting. He finally looked at her, assessing. You're a civilian who is trained like a soldier, which makes you adaptable in ways pure military operatives aren't. They follow structure. You improvise. She sat, taking a careful sip of coffee that was indeed excellent. Is this your recruitment speech? Because I already said yes. This is orientation. Taejin set down his tablet with the decisive gesture of a man moving from one agenda item to the next. You need to understand how my organization works before I introduce you to it. Context prevents embarrassing mistakes. Such as shooting someone important because you misread the power dynamics. His tone was light, but his eyes were serious. I run what outsiders would call a crime syndicate. I prefer to think of it as an alternative power structure that operates in spaces the government can't or won't control. We handle enforcement, mediation, and resource allocation for Korea's less legal enterprises. Drugs? Prostitution. Amara's voice was flat, clinical. She'd seen enough of both in her father's world to have opinions that were complicated and mostly dark. Among other things. But I'm selective. Taejin leaned back, his posture relaxed, but his attention absolute. No human trafficking, that's non-negotiable. No child exploitation of any kind. Drugs are tolerated but regulated. I'd rather control the market than let it run wild. Prostitution is complex. Many of the women who work under my protection do so voluntarily and are treated better than they would be independently. That's a very sanitized way of describing being a gangster. I could describe it less charitably if you prefer. I'm a criminal who maintains order among other criminals. I resolve disputes, enforce contracts, provide services the legitimate economy won't touch. I also donate to children's hospitals, fund small businesses in poor neighborhoods, and employ several hundred people who would otherwise have limited options. He paused. I'm not a good man, Amara. But I'm a predictable one. In our world, predictability is a kind of mercy. It was the same logic her father had used, that criminals with codes were better than criminals with chaos. Amara wasn't sure she agreed, but she understood it. So, what's my role in this merciful crime empire? Consultant. Troubleshooter. Cultural translator. Taejin stood, gesturing for her to follow him. Come. Meet the family. They descended into the mansion's lower level, not a basement, but a command center disguised as a wine cellar. The transformation was jarring, luxury giving way to function, aesthetics replaced by efficiency. Multiple screens showed security feeds, financial data, news broadcasts in 5 languages. A conference table dominated the center, surrounded by chairs currently occupied by men and 2 women who looked up when Taejin entered. The room's temperature dropped 5 degrees. Amara recognized the look in their eyes, the calculation, the sizing up, the instant categorization of threat level. She'd seen it 1,000 times in her father's associates. These were predators evaluating whether she was competition or prey. Good. Let them wonder. Everyone, Taejin announced in Korean, his voice carrying the casual authority of someone who never needed to shout. This is Amara Park. She'll be working with us on special projects. Her word carries my authority. Any problems she identifies, you treat as if I identified them myself. Silence. The kind that was louder than objections. A man at the far end of the table, late 40s, scar tissue around his left eye suggesting old violence, expensive suit that couldn't quite hide the gun beneath, spoke first. With respect, boss, who is she? Where does she come from? We don't know her family, her background, her credentials are sufficient, Taejin interrupted, his tone allowing no argument. She comes recommended by someone I trusted with my life. That's all you need to know. The scarred man, Park Jin-ho, Amara would learn later, Taejin's security chief and longest-serving lieutenant, clearly wanted to push. His jaw worked, teeth grinding audibly. But he subsided with a curt nod that communicated resistance while maintaining the appearance of obedience. Amara had learned to read hierarchies before she could read books. This was a power structure held together by respect, fear, and profit. Taejin was absolute, but that absolutism depended on maintaining the loyalty of men like Jin-ho who had their own power bases. Her presence was a disruption. Disruptions caused instability. Instability got people killed. She needed to handle this carefully. I don't want anyone's position, she said in Korean, her accent acceptable if not fluent. I'm not here to run operations or give orders. I'm here to solve specific problems that require different perspectives. Different how? This from one of the women, younger, maybe 30, with the kind of face that made men underestimate her until she broke their assumptions along with their arms. What do you bring that we don't have? Fair question. Amara respected it. I grew up in environments similar to yours, but in different countries. West Africa mostly. My father worked in logistics, a diplomatic way of saying arms dealer, so I learned to read power structures, identify weaknesses, understand how different criminal organizations operate, and where their blind spots are. She moved closer to the table, not threatening but not submissive either. You're all experts in Korean crime networks. You know the local players, the territories, the unwritten rules. But if someone from outside is operating here, someone who doesn't follow those rules because they don't know them or don't care, you need someone who thinks like they do. And you think like a foreigner? Jinho's tone made it an insult. I think like someone who's survived by being adaptable. Amara met his gaze steadily. Which is what you need when your traditional approaches aren't working. Taejin nodded, pulling up a display on the main screen. Speaking of which, our current problem. The screen filled with surveillance photos, financial transactions, incident reports. Amara scanned them quickly, her mind automatically sorting patterns. 3 months ago, Taejin began, a new organization started operating in Seoul. They call themselves the White Tiger Coalition, though we suspect that's misdirection. They've been systematically hitting our operations, small things at first, testing our response. Delayed shipments. Disrupted collections. Nothing catastrophic, but coordinated enough to be concerning. Have you retaliated? Amara asked. Of course. We sent messages. Diplomatic first, then forceful. They ignored both. Taejin's frustration was evident in the tight set of his shoulders. We can't identify their leadership. They use intermediaries, encrypted communications, and they've insulated themselves from our usual intelligence networks. It's like fighting smoke. Amara studied the data, her father's training kicking in. Pattern recognition. Behavioral analysis. The negative space where information should be but wasn't. They're not Korean, she said after a moment. The room stirred. Jinho leaned forward. What makes you say that? Their operational rhythm is wrong. Korean gangs have structure, rigid hierarchies, established territories, relationships that go back generations. These attacks are too flexible, too willing to hit different sectors without respect for traditional boundaries. And look here, she pointed to a financial transaction. They're moving money through channels that Korean organizations typically avoid because they draw international attention. They either don't know that's risky or they don't care because they're planning to disappear anyway. Could be Japanese, one of the lieutenants offered. Yakuza have been pushing into Korean markets. No. Amara shook her head. Yakuza operations maintain face, honor, reputation, making their presence known. This is too quiet, too dispersed. If I had to guess, I'd say Chinese or Russian. Maybe both. Someone used to operating in markets where government corruption is so endemic that they don't distinguish between legal and illegal channels. Taejin was watching her with an expression that might have been approval or might have been predatory interest. Prove it. Give me something actionable. Amara returned to the data, pulling up the incident map. The attacks were color-coded by type, red for shipment disruptions, blue for territory incursions, green for financial interference. There. A pattern so subtle she almost missed it. They're testing your response time, she said, tracing connections on the screen. Look, each attack happens in a different district, but always exactly 72 hours after the previous one. They hit, then wait to see how long it takes you to respond and how you respond. They're building a database of your capabilities. Military tactics, Jinho muttered, his skepticism giving way to grudging respect. Intelligence tactics, Amara corrected. This is what foreign agencies do when they're mapping a target before a major operation. Small probes to identify weaknesses, response patterns, and decision-making hierarchies. So what's their endgame? Taejin asked. What are they building toward? Amara studied the progression of attacks, small to medium, never catastrophic, always recoverable. She thought about how her father had operated when moving into new territories, how he'd mapped power structures before making his real play. And she saw it. They're not trying to destroy you, she said slowly. They're trying to acquire you. This isn't a war, it's a very expensive job interview. They're demonstrating they can hurt you, but they're not actually trying to cripple your operations. They're showing you that they're competent, organized, and patient. When they finally make contact, it'll be with a proposal, not a threat. The room went silent as everyone processed this. Taejin's smile was sharp as a razor. That's actually brilliant. If they can prove they're capable of disrupting us, then offering to work with us instead makes them valuable rather than just threatening. It's also a trap, Amara warned. Because now they know your operations intimately. If you accept their offer, they can sabotage from inside. If you refuse, they have detailed intelligence for a real assault. So we're fucked either way? Jinho's bluntness cut through the tactical discussion. No. Amara pulled up the timeline again. We're ahead of them, because now we know what they're doing. They're still in the mapping phase, see how the attacks haven't escalated? They're not ready to make their approach yet. Which means we have time to flip the script. How? Taejin leaned forward, fully engaged now. We feed them false information. Make them think they've found weaknesses that don't exist. Create vulnerabilities in operations that don't matter while hardening the ones that do. When they finally make their proposal, they'll be operating on bad intelligence. And if they move against you instead, we'll be ready, Taejin finished, his eyes gleaming. Because we'll know exactly what they think they know. Counterintelligence 101, Amara confirmed. My father used to say, the best way to win a war is to convince your enemy they've already won it. Jinho sat back, regarding her with new eyes. The hostility had faded, replaced by the professional respect of one operator recognizing another. Okay, he said simply. I'm listening. What do you need from us? What followed was 3 hours of detailed planning, Amara working with Taejin's lieutenants to identify which operations could be sacrificed as bait, which required additional security, and how to create a false picture of organizational weakness that would lead their mysterious opponents exactly where Taejin wanted them. It was exhilarating. For 8 months, Amara had buried this part of herself, the tactical thinker, the strategic planner, the woman who could see 3 moves ahead and calculate probabilities like breathing. Working with these criminals felt like flexing muscles she'd forgotten she had. And it felt right in a way that serving cocktails never had. By the time they broke for lunch, she'd earned cautious acceptance from most of the room and outright respect from a few. Jinho pulled her aside as the others dispersed. "You're good," he said in English, his accent thicker than Taejin's, but his meaning clear. "Better than I expected. But I need to know, why are you really here?" "Because nobody with your skills works for free, and the boss won't tell us what he's paying you." Amara considered lying, then decided these people would respect honesty more. "Your boss saved my father's life 20 years ago. My father recently died. The debt transferred to me. I'm here because in the world I come from, debts matter more than anything else." "Honor," Jinho said, tasting the word like something foreign. "You're here because of honor." "I'm here because debt and honor are the only currency that survives when everything else fails," Amara corrected. "Your boss understands that." "I think you do too." Jinho studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "My father was Japik, old school, before the modern gangs. He taught me that a man without honor is just an animal in expensive clothes. I thought your generation forgot that. My generation learned it from fathers who lived in worlds where nothing else could be trusted." Something shifted in Jinho's expression, acceptance, perhaps, or recognition of kinship. "Okay," he said. "You're one of us. Not Korean, not Japik, but one of us. The ones who understand that rules matter even when the rules are written in blood." He extended his hand, and Amara shook it, a warrior's grip, firm and honest. "Welcome to the family," Jinho said. "Try not to get us all killed." "No promises," Amara replied. His laugh was rough as gravel and surprisingly warm. That night, after more strategy sessions and introductions to various parts of Taejin's operation that she suspected weren't entirely legal even by criminal standards, Amara found herself back in the study overlooking Seoul's lights. Taejin was there as she'd known he would be. Some conversations couldn't happen in front of subordinates. "You did well today," he said without preamble. "Better than I expected, and I had high expectations. Your people are competent. It makes strategy easier when you're working with professionals. They're more than competent. They're family." She thought about her father, dying in that Lagos hospital, making her promise to never return to the business. But he'd also spent her entire childhood training her for exactly this. Reading threats, understanding violence, speaking the language of people who operated outside laws and boundaries. Had he been preparing her to escape or to survive? Maybe both. Maybe he'd known that for people like them, there was no difference. 3 months, she repeated, her earlier condition. "After that, I decide." "After that, you'll have earned the right to choose," Taejin agreed. "Whatever you decide, you'll do it as family. With all the protection and obligations that entails." He raised his glass. "To debts paid and families chosen." Amara hesitated, then raised hers in return. "To survival," she countered. "To survival," Taejin echoed. They drank, and Seoul's lights stretched endlessly below them. A circuit board of lives lived in shadows and light, legal and illegal, ordinary and extraordinary. Amara Okonkwo, daughter of Colonel James Okonkwo, had stopped running. Now she would stand. And fight. And maybe, finally, become whoever she was meant to be all along. The city waited. So did she. Chapter 4. The Architecture of Violence. The White Tiger Coalition made contact on a Wednesday. Not with threats or demands, as Amara had predicted they wouldn't, but with an invitation delivered via courier to one of Taejin's legitimate businesses, a restaurant in Gangnam that served excellent bibimbap and laundered money with equal efficiency. The envelope was cream-colored, expensive, embossed with a white tiger that managed to look both elegant and predatory. Inside, a single card written in precise Hangul. We admire your resilience. Perhaps we can discuss mutual interests. The Peninsula Hotel, Thursday 8 p.m. Presidential Suite. Come alone or come with guards. We leave the choice to you as a gesture of good faith. No signature. No explicit threat. Just the confident assumption that Taejin would accept. Arrogant bastards, Jinho muttered, examining the card as if it might explode. They were gathered in the command center, Amara, Taejin, and his inner circle, analyzing every aspect of the invitation like archaeologists studying ancient text. Arrogant and smart, Amara corrected. She'd spent the last 2 weeks working with Taejin's organization, implementing the counterintelligence strategy she'd proposed. They'd deliberately exposed weaknesses in secondary operations while hardening primary ones, fed false information through channels they suspected were compromised, and created a picture of Taejin's organization that was 70% accurate and 30% strategically misleading. The invitation suggested it had worked. The coalition thought they understood Taejin's operations well enough to make an approach. They were wrong, but they didn't know that yet. The peninsula is neutral ground, Taejin observed. International hotel, high visibility, expensive enough that violence would be bad for everyone's business. They're trying to demonstrate they understand Korean protocols. Or they're mocking you, suggested Minesio, one of Taejin's financial specialists, a woman who could dismantle corporate structures with the same efficiency most people used to parallel park. The presidential suite? That's not subtle. Nothing about this has been subtle, Amara said. She was studying the envelope itself, the paper quality, the embossing, the way the tiger's eyes seem to follow you. This screams money and confidence. They want you to know they're serious players, not some startup gang trying to muscle in. So we go. Jinho asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. We go, Taejin confirmed. But carefully. Amara, I want you with me. The room stirred. Jinho's objection was immediate. Boss, with respect, bringing an unknown into a first meeting. She's not unknown. She's the person who predicted this exact scenario. Taejin's voice carried absolute authority. And she has experience with international criminal organizations that none of you possess. If this is who I think it is, her perspective will be invaluable. And if it's a trap? Minesio's pragmatism cut through the strategic posturing. Then it's a trap regardless of who I bring. Taejin smiled, sharp and cold. But I suspect they're sincere. This whole operation has been too expensive, too careful, to be prelude to a simple assassination. They want something more valuable than my death. They want your infrastructure, Amara said. Everyone turned to look at her. She continued, thinking aloud, Korea is a gateway to East Asian markets. You have established networks, political connections, and a reputation for reliable service. For a foreign organization trying to expand into this region, acquiring you would be worth more than the entire cost of their mapping operation. So this is a merger proposal. Jinho's laugh was bitter. Corporate takeover, criminal edition. Exactly. Amara met Taejin's gaze. The question is, what are they offering that would make you even consider it? Let's find out, Taejin said. The Peninsula Hotel Seoul rose like a monument to luxury, all glass and marble, and the kind of studied elegance that cost more per night than most people made in a month. Amara had been in expensive hotels before, in Lagos and Monrovia and Dubai, usually while her father conducted business that couldn't be conducted anywhere police might notice. This was different. This was wealth performed as art. They arrived exactly at 8 p.m., not early enough to seem eager, not late enough to seem disrespectful. Taejin, Amara, and 4 guards in suits that concealed enough weapons to start a small war. Jinho had wanted to bring a dozen men, but Taejin had refused. This was diplomacy, not invasion. Though in their world, the line between the two was remarkably thin. The presidential suite was on the top floor, accessed by a private elevator that probably cost more than Amara's entire childhood home. The guards positioned themselves strategically, 2 at the elevator, 2 flanking the suite entrance. Taejin and Amara entered alone. The suite was obscene. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Seoul's glittering sprawl, furniture that looked like museum pieces, art on the walls that probably was. And in the center of this temple to excess, 3 people waited. 2 men, 1 woman. All in their 40s or early 50s, dressed in expensive but understated clothing that screamed serious money, no need to advertise. The older man, silver-haired, European features, eyes that missed nothing, stood as they entered. "Mr. Kim," he said in perfect English with a slight Russian accent. "Thank you for accepting our invitation. I am Dmitry Volkov. My associates, Chinwei Dash," he gestured to the Chinese man on his left, "and Natasha Kuznetsova." Natasha, blonde, sharp-featured, with the kind of predatory beauty that Amara had learned to recognize as camouflage for competence, was studying Amara with unconcealed interest. "You brought a guest," Natasha observed, also in English. "We said you could, but I admit I'm curious. She doesn't match your usual security profile." "Miss Park is my consultant on international operations," Taejin replied smoothly, his English flawless. "Given that you've spent months studying my organization, I thought fresh eyes might be valuable." "Fair enough." Dmitry gestured to chairs arranged around a low table where tea and whiskey waited with diplomatic neutrality. "Please sit. We have much to discuss." They settled into positions that looked casual, but weren't, everyone maintaining sight lines to exits, hands positioned for quick access to weapons that were certainly present. Amara cataloged threats automatically. Dmitry was armed, shoulder holster. Chinwei had something in his jacket pocket, probably a knife based on how the fabric fell. Natasha had a gun in her purse, which sat within easy reach. None of which mattered if this went kinetic. The suite probably had additional security hidden somewhere, and she doubted the coalition would have organized this meeting without backup plans. "Let me be direct," Dmitry began, pouring whiskey with the confidence of a man hosting his own territory. "We represent a consortium of interests, Russian, Chinese, and Ukrainian, who are expanding operations throughout East Asia. We've been observing your organization for several months, and we're impressed. You run a tight operation, maintain excellent political connections, and most importantly, you understand the value of stability over chaos." "High praise," Taejin said neutrally, though your method of observation was somewhat aggressive. "Necessary," Chinwei interjected. His English was more heavily accented but equally precise. "We needed to verify capability, not just reputation. Words are cheap. Your response to our probes demonstrated organizational discipline and strategic thinking. That's valuable." "So valuable you're proposing what exactly?" Taejin sipped his whiskey, perfectly calm. Natasha leaned forward. "Partnership. We provide capital, international connections, and access to markets you currently can't touch efficiently: Europe, Central Asia, certain African regions. You provide local infrastructure, political cover, and operational expertise in East Asia. Everyone profits." It was, Amara had to admit, a compelling offer. "If sincere." "And if I refuse?" Taejin asked. "Then we compete," Dmitry said simply. "We're committed to establishing presence in Korea regardless. Partnership means we build something together. Competition means we build anyway, but with significantly more bloodshed and expense for everyone involved." "That sounds like a threat." "It's a realistic assessment." Dmitry's smile didn't reach his eyes. "We're not threatening you, Mr. Kim. We're offering you a choice: profit together or fight each other. Both outcomes are acceptable to us, but one is vastly more efficient." Amara watched this exchange with growing unease. Something was off. The offer was too reasonable, too balanced. In her experience, criminal partnerships were always weighted, one side dominant, the other subordinate. This sounded like equality, which in criminal economics usually meant someone was lying. "May I ask a question?" she said quietly. All eyes turned to her. Dmitry nodded with magnanimous permission that set her teeth on edge. "You've spent considerable resources mapping Mr. Kim's organization. You clearly have sophisticated intelligence capabilities and significant capital. So why do you need him at all? Why not just establish your own operations independently?" Natasha's smile was approving. "Smart question. The honest answer? Because we learned from our mistakes elsewhere. We tried independent operations in Japan. It was a disaster. The Yakuza fought us at every turn, and without local knowledge, We spent 3 years and millions of dollars accomplishing very little. We tried acquisition in Singapore, bought a mid-level organization that seemed promising. Their leader took our money and betrayed us to local authorities within 6 months. Partnership is expensive in the short term but more stable long term, Chinwei added. Especially when the partner understands that stability serves everyone's interests. It was a good answer. Plausible. Maybe even true. But Amara's instincts, trained by a father who'd survived by trusting nothing at face value, were screaming that something crucial was being left unsaid. You've outlined benefits, Taejin said. Now outline costs. What, specifically, would you require from me? Access to your distribution networks, initially, Dimitri replied. We have products we'd like to move through Korean channels, nothing that would conflict with your existing operations. Pharmaceuticals, primarily. Some electronics. Luxury goods with complicated provenance. Pharmaceuticals. Taejin's tone was carefully neutral. Define that. Legitimate medications diverted from official channels. Antibiotics, antivirals, treatments for chronic conditions. Nothing recreational, nothing addictive. We're not asking you to become drug dealers. Natasha's clarification came quickly, as if she'd anticipated this concern. There's massive demand in Asia for affordable medications that official channels price beyond reach. We simply facilitate alternative supply chains. It was almost believable. Almost. I need time to consider this, Taejin said. An offer this significant requires consultation with my organization. Of course. Dimitri stood. The meeting clearly concluded. We're staying in Seoul for another week. Consider carefully, Mr. Kim. This opportunity won't remain open indefinitely. We're committed to expansion. The only variable is whether you profit from it or oppose it. They exchanged pleasantries, contact information, promises to communicate soon. Professional. Cordial. Civilized. Amara didn't trust a word of it. In the elevator descending to ground level, Taejin remained silent, his expression unreadable. Only when they were back in the SUV, surrounded by his guards and the privacy of tinted windows, did he speak. Thoughts? They're lying, Amara said immediately. Jinho, sitting in the front passenger seat, turned to look at her. About what specifically? I don't know yet. But the whole presentation was too polished, too reasonable. Criminal organizations don't offer equitable partnerships, they offer subordination disguised as collaboration. She thought about her father's deals, the careful negotiations where both parties pretended to benefit equally, while each sought leverage over the other. They want something more than distribution networks. The pharmaceuticals? Minesio suggested. She'd been listening via encrypted line, monitoring the meeting remotely. Maybe. Or maybe that's cover for something else. Amara pulled up mental notes, replaying the conversation. Did you notice how Natasha specified nothing recreational, nothing addictive? That's oddly specific unless they're trying to preemptively address a concern. You think they're lying about the product, Taejin said. Not a question. I think they're telling a version of truth that omits crucial details. Pharmaceuticals could mean anything: legitimate medications, experimental drugs, or chemical precursors for substances they claim they're not dealing in. Fentanyl, Jinho said suddenly. Chinese cartels have been flooding American markets with fentanyl precursors disguised as legitimate pharmaceutical ingredients. You think they're trying to establish a Korean route? It would explain the elaborate courtship, Mineso added. Korea has legitimate pharmaceutical manufacturing, established shipping routes to multiple countries, and less scrutiny than Chinese ports currently receive. We'd be the perfect laundry for dirty supply chains. Taejin was silent, processing. Finally, can we prove it? Not yet, Amara admitted. But I can find out. Give me 3 days and access to someone who understands pharmaceutical supply chains. If they're lying about the product, there'll be evidence. Shipping manifests, corporate shells, connections to known fentanyl manufacturers. And if you're wrong? Taejin's question was mild, but the underlying test was clear. Was she confident enough to stake her credibility on this? If I'm wrong, you accept their offer and I apologize for wasting your time. Amara met his gaze steadily. But I'm not wrong. My father taught me to read lies before he taught me to read contracts. They're hiding something. 3 days, Taejin decided. After that, I need to give them an answer. Make it count. What followed was 72 hours of the kind of intensive intelligence work that Amara had watched her father conduct 100 times, but never fully participated in. She had resources now that she'd never had before: Taejin's financial specialists who could track money through layers of corporate shells, his technology experts who could crack encrypted communications, his network of informants who knew which shipping companies moved what cargo through which ports. She coordinated them like an orchestra conductor, pulling threads from a dozen sources and weaving them into a coherent picture. Minasio proved invaluable, her financial forensics skills turning opaque corporate structures into readable maps. "Look at this," she said on the second day, pulling up ownership documents for what looked like a legitimate Hungarian pharmaceutical company. On the surface, it's clean, licensed, regulated, exports generic medications to developing markets. But 3 layers down, it's owned by a shell company registered in Cyprus, which is owned by another shell in Malta, which traces back to accounts connected to known Russian organized crime figures. "That's one of Dmitri's companies?" Amara asked. "Can't prove it directly, but the ownership structure matches patterns we've seen in other Russian operations. And look at their shipping routes. They export primarily to countries with weak pharmaceutical regulation: Nigeria, Ukraine, parts of Southeast Asia. Places where nobody asks too many questions about what's actually in the containers." "What about connections to fentanyl manufacturing?" "Nothing direct. But Minasio highlighted a series of transactions. They've been purchasing precursor chemicals from Chinese manufacturers that are known to supply fentanyl labs. Not enough to prove anything criminal, but enough to establish a pattern." Amara felt the pieces clicking together. They're not lying about pharmaceuticals. They actually do move legitimate medications. It's just not the only thing they move. "Classic cover operation," Jinho agreed. He'd been working his own sources, contacts in shipping, customs, law enforcement. 90% of their cargo is legitimate. The other 10% is precursor chemicals, fentanyl, or other controlled substances hidden among legal products. If you inspect the cargo, most of what you find is exactly what the manifests claim. The illegal stuff is just well-hidden bonus inventory. By day 3, Amara had enough evidence to paint a clear picture. The White Tiger Coalition was real. Dmitry Volkov, Chin Wei, and Natasha Kuznetsova represented a genuinely international criminal network with significant resources and sophisticated operations. They did move pharmaceuticals exactly as they'd claimed. But they also moved fentanyl precursors, synthetic opioids, and other controlled substances, using those pharmaceutical shipments as cover. The Korean partnership would give them access to new markets, cleaner shipping routes, and the political cover that Taejin's connections provided. If Taejin accepted, he'd be complicit in an operation that was killing thousands of people across multiple continents. "What do you want to do?" Amara asked Taejin when she'd presented her findings. They were alone in his study, Seoul's light spreading below them as they always did, beautiful and indifferent. "What does my consultant recommend?" Taejin's tone was unreadable. "Refuse the partnership. They'll be angry, maybe violent. But you have time to prepare, and now you know what you're facing. If you accept, you become part of something that contradicts your stated principles. You said no child exploitation. Fentanyl kills children. It kills everyone. It also makes extraordinary amounts of money." "I know." Amara held his gaze. "So the question is, what kind of criminal do you want to be?" Taejin laughed, sharp and bitter. "You sound like your father. He asked me that once, in Liberia. While he was keeping me alive, he told me that every man chooses what line he won't cross. That those lines are the only thing separating professionals from monsters." "What did you tell him?" "That I'd already crossed so many lines I wasn't sure any remained." Taejin moved to the windows, his reflection ghostly against the city. "But then he saved my life anyway. Never asked for payment. Never leveraged the debt. Just gave me the choice to survive and decide what kind of man that survival would make me." He turned back to face her. "I built this organization on principles that people mock as sentimental. No trafficking, no exploitation, controlled violence. I did it because I decided that if I was going to be a criminal, I'd at least be one who could look at himself in the mirror. So you refuse? I refuse. The decision was absolute. And I prepare for the consequences. Because Dmitry Volkov didn't spend months mapping my organization just to accept no gracefully. He'll come at you hard, Amara warned. Everything they've learned, every weakness they think they've identified, they'll exploit it all. Let them try. Taejin's smile was cold as winter. Thanks to you, half those weaknesses don't exist. And the ones that do? We've been fortifying them for 2 weeks. It's still going to be messy. War usually is. He poured whiskey, the ritual now familiar. But we'll have advantages they don't anticipate. They think they understand Korea's criminal landscape. They don't. They think they've mapped my organization accurately. They haven't. And most importantly, he handed Amara a glass. They don't know I have Colonel Okonkwo's daughter helping me plan their defeat. Amara accepted the glass, feeling the weight of what she'd committed to. This wasn't theoretical anymore. This was war, and she was helping orchestrate it. To survival, Taejin toasted, echoing their earlier ritual. To survival, Amara agreed. They drank, and somewhere in Seoul's vast sprawl, the White Tiger Coalition was planning their response to a refusal they didn't know was coming. The city held its breath. So did Amara. Because the easy part was over. Now came the blood. Chapter 5, The Price of Honor. Taejin declined the coalition's offer on a Friday morning via a message that was professionally courteous and absolutely unambiguous. By Friday evening, the first bomb exploded. Not literally, these were sophisticated criminals, not terrorists. But the assault on Taejin's operations was explosive in every other sense. Simultaneous hits on 3 distribution centers, 2 of his legitimate businesses firebombed. One of his financial specialists disappeared from her apartment without a trace. Minacio, the woman who'd helped Amara trace the coalition's pharmaceutical front companies, who'd untangled corporate structures with the focus of a master chess player. Gone. They took her alive, Jinho reported, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. They were gathered in the command center, every screen showing damage reports, emergency alerts, cascading chaos. Security footage shows 4 men, professional extraction, no struggle. They wanted her for interrogation. How much does she know? Taejin's question was clinical, necessary. Everything. Jinho's honesty was brutal. Financial structures, operations, connections. If they make her talk. She'll talk, Amara interrupted quietly. Everyone turned to look at her. She continued, keeping her voice flat, professional. Everyone talks eventually. That's not weakness, it's biology. Pain breaks people. The question isn't if she'll reveal information, it's how long she can hold out and what we do at that time. The room absorbed this grim calculus. We have maybe 12 hours before they extract anything useful, Amara estimated. Interrogation takes time if you want accurate information. Rush it, and people just tell you what they think you want to hear. But they'll be methodical, careful. They need intelligence, not just revenge. So we have 12 hours to do what? Jinho demanded. Launch a rescue? We don't even know where they're holding her. We find out. Taejin's voice carried absolute authority. Amara, you said they'd attack. You've been planning our defense. What do we do now? This was the moment. The test. Everything she'd claimed about tactical thinking, strategic planning, understanding how international criminal organizations operated, it all came down to this. Amara moved to the main display, pulling up the map of Seoul overlaid with Taejin's operations and the coalition's known activities. They hit us in 3 locations simultaneously, she said, thinking aloud. Distribution centers in Itaewon, Gangnam, and Seongpa. That's not random, those are our highest volume sites. They're trying to cripple our operational capacity immediately. Succeeding, too, one of the lieutenants muttered. No. Amara shook her head. They're succeeding at destroying infrastructure. But infrastructure is replaceable. What's irreplaceable is information, which is why they took Minacio instead of killing her. They want to know what we know about them. She highlighted the 3 attack sites, then drew connections. Look at the pattern. Itaewon is our international hub, connections to Yakuza, Chinese triads, Russian operators. Gangnam is our financial center, money laundering, corporate fronts, political payoffs. Sangpa is our Korean domestic operations, local gangs, street-level distribution. They're trying to isolate us by hitting all three simultaneously. Your point. Jinho's impatience was understandable. My point is that they're operating on the intelligence they gathered before we started feeding them false information. They think those three sites are critical. But we've been shifting operations for 2 weeks. The real critical infrastructure is elsewhere now. Understanding dawned across several faces. They're attacking based on outdated intelligence, Taejin said slowly. Exactly. Which means their follow-up moves will also be based on false assumptions. Amara pulled up the counterintelligence plan they'd implemented, the deliberate vulnerabilities they'd created, the real operations they'd hardened, the false trails they'd laid. If we can predict their next move based on what they think they know, we can be waiting for them. And Minicio? Jinho's voice was rough. Is our leverage. Amara hated saying it, hated the cold calculation, but this was the world her father had prepared her for. They took her to a secure location, somewhere they control, somewhere they can work without interruption. That location is probably here. She highlighted an area in Incheon, based on shipping patterns we traced earlier. The coalition has been moving resources through Incheon port. Odds are they've established a base nearby. That's a guess, someone objected. It's an educated guess based on operational logic. Interrogations require secure facilities, medical supplies if they're being careful, and easy access to disposal sites if things go wrong. Incheon gives them all of that plus proximity to their shipping operations. Taejin was studying the map with predatory focus. Even if you're right, storming an unknown facility where they're holding a hostage is suicide. We don't storm it. Amara was building the plan as she spoke, pieces falling into place with the terrible clarity of her father's training. We trade for her. Trade what? We have nothing they want. We have something better than what they want. We have something they need. Amara pulled up the pharmaceutical company ownership structures Minicio had uncovered. They're hiding their fentanyl operation behind legitimate pharmaceutical exports. If those front companies get exposed, if evidence of their fentanyl distribution reaches the right authorities, their entire operation collapses. We don't have that kind of evidence, Jinho protested. No, but they don't know that. Amara felt the plan crystallizing, elegant, and brutal. We convince them we have documentation of their fentanyl distribution. Shipping manifests, financial records, chemical purchases. Everything needed to destroy their pharmaceutical cover. Then we offer a trade, Minicio, for our silence. They'll know it's a bluff. Maybe, but they can't risk it. That operation represents millions in infrastructure, hundreds of millions in future revenue. Even a 10% chance we actually have that evidence is too risky to ignore. Taejin was nodding slowly. You learned deception from your father. I learned that in our world, information is more valuable than violence. And the threat of exposure is more powerful than actual exposure because it preserves leverage. There's one problem, Jinho said. Even if they agree to trade, they'll try to kill us during the exchange. Get Minicio back and eliminate the threat of exposure simultaneously. Of course they will. Amara's smile was sharp as her father's had been when he was planning something particularly devious. Which is why we'll be ready. We choose the location, control the variables, and make sure they understand that if we die, the evidence, real or imagined, goes public automatically. What followed was 18 hours of preparation that felt like 18 days. Amara coordinated with Taejin's people to create convincing forgeries of pharmaceutical shipping records, building a case file that looked legitimate enough to survive casual inspection. They established dead man's switches, automated systems that would release information if they failed to check in. They selected an exchange location that gave them tactical advantages while appearing neutral. And they waited for the coalition's response. It came via encrypted message at 3 a.m. We have your accountant. You claim to have documents. Prove it. Amara sent back a carefully selected portion of the forged records, enough to demonstrate legitimacy, not enough to give away everything. An hour later. Interesting. Perhaps we can discuss terms. The exchange was set for Sunday night, 11 p.m., at a construction site in Incheon, a half-built commercial complex that had been abandoned when the developer went bankrupt. Multiple entry points, excellent sight lines, enough cover for both sides to position security without obvious threats. Perfect for an ambush. Which meant perfect for a counter-ambush. Taejin brought 20 men, positioned in layers around the site, some visible, most not. Amara stood beside him in the empty lot that would someday be a parking structure, wind whipping off the yellow sea carrying salt and the smell of industrial port operations. At 11:03 p.m., headlights cut through the darkness. 3 SUVs, arranged in a defensive formation. They stopped 30 meters away, engines running, positioned for quick escape. Doors opened with synchronized precision. Dmitry Volkov emerged from the center vehicle, flanked by Chin Wei and 4 heavily armed men. No Natasha, smart, keeping leadership distributed in case this went sideways. And between 2 guards Min Seo. Alive. Bruised but walking, which meant the interrogation hadn't gotten far. Either she'd held out better than expected, or they'd been more careful than Amara had anticipated. Mr. Kim, Dmitry called across the empty space. You've caused me considerable inconvenience. You attacked my operations, Taejin replied, his voice carrying clearly in the night air. I'm simply protecting my interests. By threatening to expose commercial activities that are none of your concern. They became my concern when you tried to make me complicit in them. Dmitry smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. So we have a philosophical disagreement. Fortunately, I'm a practical man. You have documents you claim prove certain irregularities. I have your colleague. A simple exchange seems equitable. Show me she's unharmed first. At Dmitry's nod, the guard stepped back from Min Seo. She stood straighter, meeting Taejin's gaze across the distance. Even battered, she radiated defiance. Satisfied? Dmitry asked. That depends on your definition of unharmed, Taejin replied. But yes. The documents are here. He gestured to a briefcase Amara held, encrypted on a drive. The encryption key will be provided once Ms. Min is safely in my custody. And the automatic release system? Will be deactivated once we verify the drive contents are complete and unaltered. Dmitry's smile widened fractionally. You've thought this through. I learned from someone who understood that survival requires preparation. Colonel Okonkwo. Dmitry said the name casually, watching for reaction. Yes, we know who your consultant is. Amara Okonkwo, daughter of West Africa's late great arms dealer. I must admit, I underestimated you, Mr. Kim. Hiding her among your organization was clever. Amara felt ice slide down her spine. They knew. Had known, probably since the Peninsula meeting. Had been planning around her involvement. She's not hidden, Taejin said calmly. She's my colleague. And frankly, she's the reason you're here negotiating instead of lying dead in one of my warehouses. How fortunate for us both. Dmitry's tone suggested he found the situation amusing. Shall we proceed with the exchange? The choreography was precise. Min Seo walking forward, Amara walking out with the briefcase, meeting in the middle of the empty lot. 2 women crossing paths under floodlights that turned them into performers in a violent theater. You okay? Amara murmured as they passed. Been better, Min Seo replied, her voice rough but steady. They know about the forgeries. This is a trap. And then she was past, walking toward Taejin's position while Amara continued toward Dmitry, every sense screaming danger. She stopped 3 meters from the Russian, close enough to hand over the briefcase, far enough to maintain personal space. His guards had weapons trained on her casually, almost politely, but trained nonetheless. The drive, Dmitry said, extending his hand. Amara opened the briefcase, showing him the encrypted drive nestled in foam padding. As promised, the encryption key will be provided once. Once nothing, Dmitry interrupted, and his smile transformed into something predatory. You see, Ms. Okonkwo, we've been studying your father's methods for years. He was a master of bluffing, of creating leverage from nothing. That's what this is, a beautiful bluff. These documents might be real, or might be convincing forgeries. Honestly, I'm impressed either way. Then why are you still talking instead of taking the drive? Because I wanted you close enough to understand something important. Dmitry's voice dropped, intimate and threatening. Your father owed debts too. Did you know that? He borrowed money from Russian interests early in his career, when he was building his empire. He paid them back, eventually, but certain people remember. Certain people have been very interested in what happened to Colonel Okonkwo's assets after his death. Understanding crashed over Amara like cold water. This was never about Taejin. Oh, it absolutely was about Taejin. His infrastructure is genuinely valuable. But when we learned you were involved, the operation became so much more interesting. Dimitri's smile was a knife. Your father left debts, Ms. Okonkwo. Not money, something far more valuable. Information. Leverage. Keys to networks and contacts that died with him. And you, his carefully trained daughter, might know where those keys are hidden. I don't. Probably true. But you could figure it out, given proper motivation. Which is why you're coming with us tonight, and Mr. Kim is going to let you go without a fight. Like hell, Amara started to say, but Dimitri raised his hand. Across the lot, one of the coalition's men raised a rifle. The scope glinted in the floodlights, aimed directly at Taejin. One word from me, Dimitri said pleasantly, and your employer dies. Then my men kill everyone else here. We take you anyway, but with significantly more bodies to explain. Or you walk to that vehicle voluntarily, Mr. Kim lives, and we have a civilized conversation about your father's legacy. Amara's mind raced through possibilities. Taejin's men were positioned throughout the site, but they'd been planning for a hostage rescue, not an assassination defense. The sniper had clean shot. Even if they returned fire, Taejin would be dead before the bullet left the chamber. Checkmate. If I go with you, she said carefully, you leave Taejin alone. No revenge, no follow-up attacks. His organization is off limits. You're hardly in a position to negotiate terms. I'm in exactly the position to negotiate. Because if you kill Taejin and take me by force, I'll die before telling you anything useful. I'll make you work for every piece of information, and some things I'll take to my grave just to spite you. Amara met his eyes, channeling every ounce of her father's stubborn defiance. But if you deal honestly, if you actually leave Taejin alone, then maybe I cooperate. Maybe I help you find whatever you think my father left behind. Dimitri studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Very well. Mr. Kim's organization remains unmolested. You come with us voluntarily. We discuss your father's affairs in a civilized manner. If you're helpful, you leave with your life and your freedom. If not, he shrugged. Well, we'll cross that bridge if we reach it. Amara, don't. Taejin's voice carried across the lot, sharp with command. We'll find another way. There is no other way, Amara called back, surprised by how calm she sounded. I'm the one they want. Always have been. This was just the most efficient way to get me. She looked at Dimitri. I need to give him something. A gesture of good faith that you'll honor this agreement. Such as, the drive is real. The documents are forged, but the evidence of your fentanyl operations exists. I just didn't have time to compile it all. Give me 3 days with access to a computer, and I'll show you exactly where the vulnerabilities in your pharmaceutical cover are. Help you fix them. Call it a goodwill gesture. Dimitri's laugh was genuine, appreciative. You really are your father's daughter. Always finding the angle, the leverage. Very well. 3 days. You help me secure my operations, and I'll consider it down payment on the information you'll provide about Colonel Okonkwo's legacy. He gestured to the SUV. After you. Amara walked past him, past his guards, toward the vehicle that would take her into captivity. She didn't look back at Taejin, at the organization she'd helped defend, at the life she'd just traded for his survival. But as she climbed into the SUV, she caught Minasio's eye across the lot. The other woman gave her a subtle nod, respect, recognition, understanding. They'd gotten Minasio back. Taejin would survive. The organization would endure. All it had cost was Amara's freedom. Debts are paid in blood or betrayal, her father's voice echoed in her memory. But he'd been wrong about one thing. Sometimes debts were paid in sacrifice. In making yourself the payment so others could remain free. The SUV door closed with a final sounding click. Through the tinted windows, she watched Seoul's lights recede, taking with them everything she'd built in 3 weeks with Taejin's organization. But she'd learned something in those weeks, something her father had tried to teach her all along. Survival wasn't about escaping violence. It was about choosing which violence you could live with. And this violence, this trade, this sacrifice, she could live with. At least until she figured out how to escape and destroy the White Tiger Coalition from the inside. Because that's what Colonel Okonkwo's daughter did. She survived. She adapted. And she made her enemies regret ever learning her name. The lights of Seoul faded behind her as the SUV headed toward Incheon, toward whatever prison Dmitry had prepared, toward 3 days of pretending to cooperate while actually planning rebellion. 3 months, she'd told Taejin when she'd agreed to work with him. Trial period. Looked like she'd be missing that evaluation meeting. But if she survived this, when she survived this, she'd have one hell of a performance review. The SUV merged onto the highway, carrying Amara Okonkwo toward her father's unfinished business, toward debts she didn't know existed, toward a future that looked nothing like the safety she'd once imagined. But that was fine. Safety had always been an illusion anyway. Time to stop hiding behind it and become the weapon her father had trained her to be. Seoul's lights disappeared completely, swallowed by darkness and distance. Amara closed her eyes and began to plan. The coalition thought they'd won. They had no idea the war had just begun. The end of the beginning.